Okay. Can you hear me? You can? Good.
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm very pleased to take part in this joint triennial conference of the InterAcademy Partnership and the worldwide meeting of the Young Academies, organized by the InterAcademy Partnership, the Global Young Academy, the US National Academy of Sciences, and the Royal Society of Canada to give a keynote on climate justice. I understand this is the first time that you're having an intergenerational triennial, and it's fitting that you have acknowledged the land of Indigenous peoples and also heard about the importance of inclusiveness, particularly of languages. My message is to scientists young and not so young. We need to communicate the climate crisis much better, and I believe it will help to do so with a climate justice approach. So let me explain. We know that historically and today, rich countries account for a very large share in the emissions of greenhouse gases, and poor countries are disproportionately affected by the impacts of the climate crisis. But we tend to talk about this in a neutral way as being human-induced. Scientists don't tend, in my experience, there are a few, but most scientists don't tend to talk about justice. But the time has come to acknowledge the layers of injustice which now require a climate justice approach. So let me unpack some of those layers. First of all, the climate crisis has disproportionately and much earlier affected the poorest countries, the poorest communities, the small island states, the indigenous peoples in our world. And they also happen to be the Black and brown and indigenous peoples. So it's also, in some sense, a racial injustice. And within that, there's the gender injustice, that women have different social roles. In some countries, they have fewer rights, like land rights. They don't have access to credit very often. They're not at the decision-making table, and yet they have to go further in drought for firewood or water. They have to put food on the table. They have to make their communities resilient. Women are doing that in their millions around the world, despite all these barriers. Thirdly, there's the intergenerational injustice. And that's what young school children with their Fridays for Future strikes, the young climate activists have been telling us, that we're not taking decisions now when we should, and we're loading their future with an impossibility. They see it as, and they understand the science very well. Young people are remarkably read up on the science, and they know that we're not doing what we should be doing quickly enough, and that's not helping them to have a safe future. The fourth injustice is a subtle one, but a really important one. Industrialized countries like Ireland, Europe, the United States, we built our economies on fossil fuel. So our task now is to honor the workers in coal and oil and gas, and in my country, peat, turf, but to also have a just transition out of fossil fuel and a just transition into clean energy and the jobs that go with that, also for the communities of those traditional workers. So we have to have money and resources for just transition. And the fifth injustice is the injustice to nature herself. The incredible extinction of species that we're reading about, that scientists are reporting on, the loss of biodiversity, the fact that we're harming the ecosystems that protect us. What are we doing to the oceans? The acidification, the loss of fish life, etc. What we are doing is not wise and it's not helping. And so these are the layers of injustice. And why I want scientists to speak a little about justice when they're speaking is because people don't really change behavior, change attitudes on the basis of science and statistics and data and digital, etc. They change from the heart. They change because they see the human, people-centered dimension to a problem. That's how they change. And a climate justice approach also emphasizes the urgency of the moment, with the window closing on staying at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial standards. We need governments to really align their nationally determined contributions to being net zero by 2050. They promised they would do this in COP27, but not very many of them have become more ambitious. We need a radical overhaul of the multilateral development banks, the MDBs, to provide significant financing for developing countries to enable rapid building of green economies, along the lines that Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, has been talking about, her Bridgetown initiative, or some equivalent of that opens the coffers of the World Bank and the IMF and provides the money that really is our children's and our grandchildren's money to make it available now for developing countries. And we need to fulfill the promise that was made at the COP in Glasgow, COP26, to double climate adaptation finance by 2025. And we haven't seen a roadmap really for that. And of course, we haven't yet delivered on the 100 billion a year, which was promised in Copenhagen, and which has become a kind of trust breaker for developing countries. And finally, we need a mechanism at COP27 for loss and damage. That was almost achieved at COP26, but was blocked both by the United States and by the European Union out of a selfishness, basically, and a lack of appreciation of the injustice that is rampant and runs right through the whole of the climate story. So I want to now, above all else, talk about the urgency and talk about the need for what we call a moonshot mentality. You remember the way John F. Kennedy said that the United States would put a man on the moon. It was impossible, but it was achieved in 8 years. Well, in January, we will have 7 years to 2030. You, the scientists, are telling us, the IPCC is telling us, we have to reduce by at least 45% global carbon emissions by 2030 to be on track for a net zero by 2050. We have to greatly enhance our biodiversity, bring it back, regenerate, rewild, turn the clock back on the damage we are causing to the biodiversity loss. And women leaders have begun to step up. We've decided to have what we call a feminist or feminine approach to the moonshot that John F. Kennedy had in putting a man on the moon. Our moonshot we call Project Dandelion. The dandelion is the only flower or weed that grows on all 7 continents. It's very resilient. You can't get rid of it. You try to get rid of it from your lawn, your green. It's almost impossible. And how do you spread it? Just by blowing. And children blow the seed. So you spread it very easily. And we're beginning, we who are part of the climate women leaders movement are reaching out to our sisters, the women-led huge networks that do wonderful work in so many areas, in violence against women, girls' education, health issues, Me Too issues, etc., but haven't so far prioritized climate. And we're saying, keep on doing what you're doing, but also, and importantly, prioritize now the climate crisis and make every one of your members aware of taking steps, like making it personal, by being angry about those who aren't doing enough, and above all, imagining this future that we need to rush towards. So the narrative that we have for ourselves in Project Dandelion is a very positive one, because we don't like doom and gloom narrative. It doesn't energize people. It doesn't excite people. It doesn't get people interested. They just say, there's nothing I can do. I'm just going to put the head down and carry on with my life. We need a positive narrative. The narrative we have learned is from one of our indigenous members of this Connected Leader Women's Network. Jude Bico is from New Mexico, and in her tribe there, they have a saying, what if our best times are still ahead of us. And the interesting thing is they are ahead of us. If we can get over the hump and into the clean energy world that's waiting, it will be a world without fossil fumes. So we'll save so many lives, particularly the lives of women with their dirty cooking. Indoor and outdoor pollution from fossil fuel kills millions every year, as we know. It'll be wonderful to live in cities that are green with their gardens and even farms in cities, to have rewilding of nature, to have conservation agriculture, to breathe the air, to be closer to nature, to have the seas brimming with fish and regulated conservation fishing, etc., etc. Yes, our best times are still ahead of us, but so are our worst times. And that's where we're heading. We're heading for a world that will be well above 2 degrees Celsius at the moment. And that will be, as you know, as scientists, will be catastrophic. So what we need is a climate justice movement. We're not saying that women leaders who come together will solve this on their own. No, we're going to join with young climate scientists, with climate activists, with the indigenous communities, with the progressive business community, which is as urgent about climate as I am. I'm part of a B team of business leaders, and they speak exactly the same way I'm speaking to you. And artists and faith-based groups, and of course, above all, scientists, because climate justice must be true to the science. We want to push the governments and the fossil fuel industry to move much more rapidly than it's doing, to get out of what's harming us. We spend 1.8 trillion a year on harmful subsidies. Imagine subsidizing what's destroying us. It's ridiculous. So scientists need to speak out more on justice and these kinds of issues so that people engage on what really speaks to them from the heart. And I'm going to end, because I'm chair of the elders that Nelson Mandela brought together, and I often quote words of wisdom of Nelson Mandela. And I love a succinct phrase of his. He said, and remember, the moonshot is to do the impossible. He said, "It always seems impossible until it is done. So let's do it. Let's do it between now and 2030. Let's get back on course for a safe world." I hope you're encouraged by me. I hope we can work together on it. Thank you.
Because we're way ahead of schedule, our speaker has agreed to answer some questions. So if you could put them in the Q&A, can you see the Q&A where you are on your computer? Would you like me to read them?
Would you help me by putting the questions? That would be better.
I'll read them.
I'll concentrate on trying to listen to the questions and then answer them.
Okay, so there are no questions there. Should we take some from here? Could you type it into the Q&A?
I'm struggling. Can I not just talk?
Yes, loudly, please.
Please introduce yourself to
start
with.
Thank you.
Do I need? You got me. Okay. So my name's Tom Solomon. I'm the Vice President International of the UK Academy of Medical Sciences. I'm a clinician. I work on emerging infections, which are the climate changes of relevance to them, based in Liverpool in the UK. I thought that was a very inspiring talk. Thank you very much. But I must admit, it feels completely at odds with what some of our governments are doing. And I completely agree with the need for us to better communicate our desires. I must admit, for me, I've seen for too many years, climate change has all been about sad polar bears on little ice floats, which doesn't, I live in Liverpool, that doesn't change the behaviours of people in Liverpool, but what changes people's behaviours is their worries about their children and their grandchildren's health. So I think it's, very important and a bit late really to change the climate change debate so that it's about health. But how do we, how do we change the opinions of our politicians who certainly in the UK, some of our very recent senior leaders have been moving in totally the opposite direction. So I want to know how we make things happen quickly. And that's a big challenge for you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's actually a great question. And I do follow what's happening in the UK very closely, being your neighboring island. Actually, I can give you an example of when a climate justice movement made a very significant difference that we've all benefited from. And that was before the Paris Climate Agreement. I was actually the special envoy of the UN Secretary General at the time. So I was following closely the French presidency before COP21 in Paris. And the French presidency was holding more and more informal ministerial meetings. And I heard Tony de Bruyn, the foreign minister of the Marshall Islands, speaking. And he was the only one who didn't bore me. The others were all repeating their lines. It was a very boring meeting. But Tony de Bruyn kept saying, do you want us to no longer be a sovereign people? Do you want our atolls, our islands to go under? Is that what you want? You really don't want it. We bought land in Fiji. We can move there, but we won't be a sovereign people. We won't be a nation. We won't be the Marshall Islands in the UN General Assembly. Is that what you want? And as he was saying that to the ministers in their ear over and over again, in Paris, when we started, people marched in the street about 1.5 to stay alive. Many of you may remember that. And I took part of that march. Some of you may have. And first of all, India especially, and other countries tucking behind India, said, no way will we agree to 1.5. This was the start of the Paris Climate Agreement. And a high ambition coalition was formed to try to change that. And there was a lot of movement and pressure on getting a change, getting 1.5 into the text. And that's why we got the goal of staying well below 2 degrees and working for 1.5 degrees. And then you may recall, the scientists had never really studied this, the IPCC. So it was asked by the Paris Agreement, is there a difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees? And if necessary, if the whole world has to stay at 1.5 degrees, what does this mean, basically? And that was their special report on 1.5 degrees in October 2018. And ever since then, we've seen the alignment with 1.5. It's become, I know China has been reluctant to concede it totally, but it has become the language. And if it hadn't been for that, if it hadn't been for the pressure of the climate justice movement at that time, we wouldn't have had that in the text. We wouldn't have had the whole debate. We wouldn't have had the study by the scientists that told us things are happening faster and they're much worse, and the tipping points are coming earlier, and wake up everybody. So I'm hoping we can make this a much more global movement and really try to put the pressure, because the investment is there, the technology is there to get us over this hump into a clean energy world. It's literally doable, but we're not doing it because the political will isn't there.
Thank you very much. We have a question online. My name is Roland Giddens, a research engineer from a national research lab in Panama. Many countries are organizing sustainability conferences around the world. What would you recommend should be the focus of these meetings to keep positive narrative, but also to try to materialize the aspirations and actually get something done?
I do agree, Roland, that there are a lot of sustainability conferences, SDG implementation conferences, Sustainable Development Goals conferences, etc. I was actually attending one personally in Glasgow yesterday, as it happens, because I could go over and back on the one day, and it was worth being there in person, because there was higher education institutions from around the world. So a lot of people are focusing. I do think the positive narrative is important, but I also think we need that urgency of not being in silos anymore, not in a scientific silo or a medical silo or a legal silo or whatever. We need to move into a movement, a climate justice movement, because we must acknowledge that there is, as I said, a lot of injustice, layers of injustice, and we have to address that in development terms, in terms of, as I said, opening up the coffers of the World Bank and the IMF with something like a Bridgetown initiative that Mia Mottley has been advocating, in order that countries which are at the moment very indebted, they've spent money because of COVID, they're still hurt earlier and still for much longer and intensively with the climate crisis. And unless they get support, they will not be able to move to clean energy as they need to. They have found, I mean, for example, in Africa, a lot of gas and coal, etc. If they were to use that in the way that some of them are talking about, because they're fed up with the lack of support from for the investment in clean energy, that would be very bad for the world. So we have a race against time in that sense as well. We really have to move everything we can. And talking about sustainability is very good, as long as it's with enough urgency and purpose and linked with the climate closing window, tipping points coming, that mean we have to really take that sense of we're going to grab our best times, because at the moment we're moving towards our worst times.
Thank you for that. As the moderator, I'm going to take the next question. As a scientist and an educator, I'm wondering what you would recommend for moving the education system from K-12 to universities more in the direction towards improving on climate change and sustainability.
Well, thank you for the question. In a way, that was my focus yesterday. I was saying to a lot of universities and the time education thing we were organizing and hosting it, that the curricula in third level institutions of all kinds should be prioritizing climate justice. It's the link between the climate scientific reality and the sustainable goals, because it's undermining the ability of poor countries to reach those goals at the moment. Countries are going backwards because of the climate crisis shocks, and and because also of the inequitable access to vaccines during COVID. That didn't help. That increased the indebtedness. But it's basically the climate crisis which is undermining the ability of countries to move in the right direction. So education is absolutely fundamental. And again, I would plead education with this positive narrative. I'm worried about the mental health of young people when they hear this constant refrain of doom and gloom. The window is closed now. We can't get to 1.5, stay at 1.5, etc. But even we're hearing a little bit from the UN. I'd like to hear a more positive, engaging language, because that gives people the energy of hope. And we need hope at the moment in order to do the impossible, which we need to do, and do it by 2030, and do it against all the odds, but achieve it because we must.
Thank you for that. We have another question online. In addition to framing things in an optimistic light, there you go, how else can we effectively encourage people to embrace new ways of working interactively and collaborating in society? This is from Vanessa Moss.
Sorry, what was the name?
Vanessa Moss.
Okay. Well, Vanessa, I have actually a specific example of stakeholders coming together on solutions. I'm part of yet another network of women leaders, you'll be glad to know, not my connected women that I mentioned, but a group of fearless women. Yeah, I hope you like that idea of fearless women leaders coming together. And we're connected with the B team of business leaders that I mentioned, because the CEO of the B team is one of the fearless women, Hala Thomasdottir from Iceland. And she and Christiana Figueres and myself co-host Fearless Women. And we decided, Europe has been very affected by the terrible war on Ukraine, of Putin, the aggressive invasion of Ukraine. It has skewed attention. It has made people, worry about and understandably about the cost of food and fuel, the rising costs anyway, cost of fertilizer, etc. But actually, this is the opportunity. So we're now involved in what we call the Europe Energy Earthshot. And we had last week 3 days of a virtual summit with almost 300 people taking part on solutions only. We had leading CEOs of the B team companies, we had indigenous people, we had young people, we had entrepreneurs, with some governments listening in, particularly with the European Union listening in. It was really very impactful. It's the start. We now break this up into what are we going to do in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months in bringing together, how do we insulate people's houses and make it affordable and sexy? That was one of the things, affordable and sexy to insulate houses. That's one of the solutions. How do we, stop talking about the problems and agree together collaboratively the solutions? And we're on course for that. And I want that now to another step. We're also planning ahead for an Africa-Europe energy earthshot that talks about the solutions that Africa and Europe can cooperate on to make sure that Africa isn't left behind, but gets the investment and the focus, whether it's for clean cooking, whether it's for the 600 plus million who never switched the switch for electricity, who need to have access to distributed clean energy. All of this is going to be on the table.
We could go on all day listening to you answer these questions and give us some advice, but we only have time for one more question, I'm afraid. This one is from Jacket Kalonowski. And he's from the Polish Young Academy and EU Young Academies of Science Advice Structure. You mentioned that you, Women Network, team up with other communities, Indigenous young people, and but you did not mention the communities groups traditionally in power in Western world. Isn't it indicating towards one key issue is not being quicker? Lack of diversity in decision making. How do we quickly change that?
Well, I couldn't agree more, Jacket, about the need for more diversity of a range of kinds. Diversity in so many different ways. People of different backgrounds, different abilities. Obviously, more women at the table, but also young people, people with disabilities. All of these their voices need to be heard. I've actually been last week, it sounds as if I'm flying all over the place, which I'm trying not to do for carbon reasons, but I was in Krakow with the European Climate Foundation earlier last week before the 3-day virtual summit that I mentioned. And I heard from groups there, a lot about their realities and the very real fear and the insecurity because of the terrible war on Ukraine and the realities of people's lives. And it is a reality, and I think you were referring to this, that governments are not changing enough. That's the problem. Even governments that seem to be on the right side are still not doing as much as they should, especially the G20 countries generally, but in particular the countries. The European Union has been stepping up, but it slipped a bit because of the war on Ukraine. It needs to re-engage heavily on this agenda, and we're hoping that we can help to push the European Union and Europe more widely to go back to the war on Ukraine, back to COP26 and the promises made there, and more than COP26. But COP26 said every country should increase its ambition by COP27. It's not being done. I think 26 out of 190 something countries have increased, and some it's only a small increase. So we're not serious yet, but I want this push of a big climate justice movement, as happened before Paris, getting that 1.5 into the text. I want that to help. Our best times are ahead of us. Just keep remembering that as scientists. We have to be true to the science. The science is very grim at the moment, but you have to say, but if we take the steps, as that's what the IPCC said, it is doable if we have the political will. And that's what we need to have. Those have been great questions. I've enjoyed very much participating, and I wish you all the best in this intergenerational triennial, which I also think is a great idea.
Thank you very much. We'll clap first. President Robinson, this has been really spectacular, and we need somebody of your stature to be our champion. And I'm sure everyone in this room and online really appreciate your comments and really want to work with you to move this forward. So thank you very much again.
Thank you.